I thought it was quite ironic that you were playing, Lucien Lelong, considering he is kind of famously known for having this fashion brand that he didn't actually design for. And you have your own fashion brand that you do design for. And I was curious if having your own kind of first person experience with fashion and that industry brought any additional layers to the role for you.
Not really. I mean, besides what is a purely personal interest or fascination with certain aspects of the fashion world, Lelong was really more of a businessman and a cultivator of designers, because so many very notable designers passed through the fashion house of Lucien Lelong, and Dior, Givenchy, Balenciaga, Balmain, Pierre Cardin, and on and on. So that didn't particularly help me. And the thing that Lelong did well was certainly the thing I did worse, which is I'm terrible at business, and remain so, and have always been so, and will always be so, I guess, unfortunately. But of course, this is at a very difficult time in Lelong's business and in French and world history, because it takes place near the end of the Second World War and for a few years after. So this is a very difficult time. Lelong had to manage both to not so antagonize the Nazis that they would burn down his business and send to a forced labor camp himself and his employees, but also trying secretly and in any way he could to ensure that the fashion business not only survived, the business as a whole, because he was the head of the haute couture syndicate in Paris, that the business would survive and that fashion would survive in Paris and not be forced to move to Berlin. Because at the time of the occupation, the idea was that the Reich would last for 1,000 years, which is a rather long time as it happens. So he had his hands full, I think. And they all did.
They did, yes. There's a really great line in all of this as well, which is the line, "Creation is our survival, our salvation." And it made me actually think of that kind of famous Carrie Fisher quote about like taking your broken heart and turning it into art. And it's very poignant for the story that's being told with the new look. And I was curious for you, have you found that to be true, that there's this transformative nature within creating art?
Completely. Meaning, I think I said earlier, sound like I'm someone who quotes myself. I said, which is unlikely. I said earlier that if there was more creation, more kind of people had that outlet, let's say, or that focus in their lives, and that was in some way enabled someone to live or survive, I think there'd be less mayhem in the world and less violence. And I'm glad you quoted Carrie Fisher. She once told me something who I knew a tiny bit. And once I asked her about a relationship of hers that had ended and how she dealt with that. And she had a fantastic quote. She said, "Oh, it's not over, it's over there." And I thought that was such a fantastic phrase. A very, very clever person she was. Very interesting.
She did. And that quote, the taking a broken heart and turning it into art, is something that like I live by. Like anytime anything bad's happening in my life, I'm like, how can I funnel this like pain into like creating something? Yeah. And that's why this quote in the new look was so poignant.
Yeah, it's a good, that's a good impulse, I think. And that's, I don't know much else we can do with heartbreak and heartache and tragedy. I mean, buy a gun, but apart from that, I think it might be better not to. And I think that's something that all artists and all creative people use and have to use.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking this time. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks
Truly
for your
remarkable
interest.
actor.
Pleasure. Take care.